He is risen. Yes. Oh man, you don't know, for pastors, it's very nerve-wracking because if everybody just goes, you're like, oh man, I did not do a good job pastoring them if they do that. All right, so anyway, my name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here. I have the privilege of actually sharing with you on this really awesome day. This is a big day for us as Christians. We love to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and so we're going to talk about that today. But before we get underway, I'm going to go ahead and pray. It's kind of the tradition we have here to pray, and then from there we'll get into what I think is probably the most important story the world has ever heard. So let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you for your grace toward us, and I thank you that as we celebrate today, we do so knowing that life is painful and messy and often broken, and this is why you came. You didn't come because everything was just killer and awesome. You came because everything was problematic and because people's lives were falling apart. And we know that even right now in this room, there's probably people that are going through tough things and facing difficult challenges and circumstances. And I pray for a special measure of your mercy sensed in their lives. And I pray for all of us that we will, again, just stand amazed by the fact that life is better with you. It's not always easier with you, but having you, even in our greatest pain, it's better with you. And so we thank you that you came into this world to make yourself available to us. We thank you, Jesus, so much in your good and perfect name. Amen. So this coming June, it will be 29 years of wedded bliss to my lovely wife back there, Ellen Marie Boswell. It's really pretty wild to think, like 29 years. We've been together for 32, married for 29, and when you've been together that long, you know, it's kind of like most of the milestones, it feels like they're more in your rearview mirror. I can't even say it. The mirror that you look backwards with, there we go, versus like life out the windshield. You know what I mean? It's like, it seems like there's a lot less new milestones to come across. But believe it or not, there's still a few. And one of those we just actually crossed the threshold of because we are now empty nesters. Yeah. We are in that season, and I think it's so weird that we call it the season of empty nesters because I'm like, well, did we push them out of the nest? Did they fall out of the nest? Did they fly out of the nest? I didn't even know we had birds. I thought we had kids, but whatever. I don't even think the label fits. I think we should change everything up. We should call it like the season of I finally have hot water when I go to take a shower. It's like that, or it's the season of finally we'll do something with those bedrooms, like turn them into offices and TV rooms, and woohoo, right? It's like our kids, the room wasn't even cold yet, and we had already converted it. Like, do you want us to come back? No, not really, no. But we love you, come visit, it'll be great, Or maybe it's the season of the chips last in the pantry for longer than 7 seconds. Like, that's another thing. It's the season where we don't have to lock our bedroom door anymore, right? So there's so many positives about this season. It's kind of weird. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be like at first. But man, I see the blessing in our lives and our kids' lives. It's really a cool thing. But I found in going into that I was really reflective. I just found myself just kind of thinking through all those years of raising kids and what our kids were like and thinking through those really beautiful times in life where you're just like, man, if I could have frozen them right at that age and right at that time, like, oh, that was so awesome. And then, frankly, I thought about the really hard, painful, aching things and you wonder how you even made it through. And so just a lot of contemplation. And then I watch some of you younger parents with your little ones and enjoy seeing that process. And it reminds me of how kids kind of develop and evolve over the course of time and become different people. And part of what I think is interesting is that there is this thing I see in younger kids, and as I thought about it with my kids, there's this thing that unfortunately sort of evaporates as they press into adulthood, right? And it has to do with questions. Now, adults, we ask a lot of questions, but we ask a lot of questions that pertain to either kind of what or how, right? Because as we become older and become adults, we're constantly saying, well, what do I want to do with my life and how do I make that happen? What college do I want to go to? What type of person do I want to marry and how do I make that happen? How do I reel that person in or whatever else? And so lots of kind of the whats and lots of the hows. But little kids, they live in this Peter Pan mode, right? And in the Peter Pan mode, they wonder a lot. And what they love to wonder is why, right? They wonder why. And they ask every chance they get, right? Why this? Why that? Mommy, why? Daddy, why? And then parents finally say, because I said so. Which, by the way, not an answer, all right? It's not an answer. It's just this venting of frustration. I don't know. I didn't pay attention in school. I don't know. Just don't ask me anymore, right? But it's awesome that kids ask the why, because I find that the why issues are the most emotive things in our existence. It's like when you can get to the real deep core of a really important why, it can be really fulfilling and satisfying, and it gives anchoring for life. I love why. In fact, as I get older, I'm trying to create margin in my life to just ask really important whys, not always what and how. And so as I was thinking through, like, all right, what are we going to do for Resurrection Sunday and what angle are we going to approach it from, I really felt led to just focus on that big, beautiful, emotive why. Why all of this? Because today, all around the world, there are Christians, they're celebrating this momentous story, and they're going to reenact it, and they're going to talk about all that happened, all the whats and all the hows, but I think that the why is probably the thing that I find most compelling in my own life. Now, to do this, we're going to have to do a little bit of what and how to give us, again, some structure to the story that we're talking about. So what we have been doing as Christians for the last week is remembering and celebrating what we call the Holy Week. And the Holy Week is this moment in time in the life of Jesus, this final apex season in his life where all sorts of things kind of transpire. Now, I know some of you maybe are guests with us today, and maybe you wouldn't see yourself as a Christian or whatever else, and so this is our opportunity to not only say, hey, we're glad you're here, but also to kind of give you a sense of what it is we Christians believe, in particular about Jesus, because for us it's all about Jesus. He's the main theme of everything we believe. And what we believe about Jesus is that he was a real person. And he was a real person who was in fact and still is God. So it's a story in which God kind of descends down to us, takes on this human frail form so that we as human beings can associate with, understand, and bond with this God that is so big we can't comprehend, but then makes himself sort of small on our behalf so that we can have interconnectedness, right? That's that Jesus that we're talking about, and this is the final week of Jesus' life. And when that week starts, it is thumping, man. I mean, it is exciting, it's celebratory. It reminds me of like those parades that go through like the city center when your team has won the Super Bowl and everybody comes out and celebrates and cheers. Remember that? It's been a little while, but yeah, it's coming. It's coming. Come on, Russ. You're getting a lot of money. Come on, Russ. All right, so anyway, sidebar, got a little distracted. All right, so same thing though. It's thumping, it's banging, it's awesome, all on that first day of the week, that Sunday of this whole unfolding week. So it says the next day, right? As Jesus was on the way to Jerusalem, this is Palm Sunday, right? There was this news that swept through the city that he's arrived, right? And so a large crowd that were all there for a particular Jewish festival, they took palm branches and went down to the road to meet him. And as they did, they shouted and they were like, praise God, blessing to the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hail to the King of Israel. So it's epic, it's off the chain, it's optimistic. Everybody's super pumped about the fact that Jesus is finally coming to do what they all want him to do. And maybe that becomes a little bit of the problem because Jesus is the only dude in the crowd who got the insider memo to what's really going down, right? Everybody else has this anticipation, and their anticipation is rooted in the fact that they have some self-interest, they have some egocentric stuff that they want to see done, and they think Jesus is going to be the icon to accomplishing that. They're sick and tired of being pushed around. They're tired of getting their teeth kicked in by the Romans, whatever it is. So they're going to get Jesus to come, and he's going to be that king that busts a sword and cracks skulls and does some damage and kicks the world in the face and sets them up as being awesome again. That's what this crowd is believing as Jesus rides in. That's why they're like, the king is here, right? Give him a weapon and let's go take care of business. Jesus, on the other hand, is looking at that whole crowd and their excitement, and he sees really at the core of their problem. He sees that they're short-sighted. He sees that they're egotistical. He sees that they're broken. He sees that they're hurting people who want to hurt other people because they feel hurt. This is, to me, a microcosm of the human condition. Hurt people who get hurt by people and tend to hurt other people in the process of it, because that's kind of the mess that goes around. But it looks good on that Palm Sunday. The reality, though, is under the surface is this broken thing that the Bible calls sin. And some people hear the word sin and they go, oh, there's that religious word. You know, sin, all it means is to miss the mark. It means there's a bar set that we can't quite get to. We can't ring the bell of perfection. Right? So when the Bible speaks of that, it's just saying, hey man, we all are falling short. We're all not living up to what we would even hope to be. That's true for all of us, and that's true for this crowd, and it's true for the whole human race. That's the problem, and it begins to hint at, again, the why of Jesus coming, this sin problem. In fact, Jesus says it this way toward the end of the week. We're getting into the, it's like Sunday, everybody's pumped up, and then there's a series of things that kind of transpire, but we get to late Thursday night, early Friday morning, where the whole thing begins to turn on its side. And Jesus makes this statement. He says, it is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Now, when you read that, you probably go, oh man, that's that rat Judas, right? And that funky bunch of religious leaders that come and don't know what's going on. It's just that group. That's the hands of sinners that he's betrayed into. And I'd say, in part. But if you honestly look at how Jesus refers to this, right? It comes up again in another context. He's saying the crowd of betrayers is much bigger. In fact, as the story begins to play out over the next handful of hours, it's like this. First of all, we see that they, being his friends, they all left him and they fled. So when your best friends say, see you, bro, I'm going to save my own bacon, that tells you something about the human condition. The people closest to you will still hurt you. And then it says not only that, but there was then the Sunday crowd that's now become the Friday mob. And they begin to shout, crucify, crucify, right? So just a couple of days before, they were like, the king is here, bro, bring it in. And now they're like, let's get rid of this guy because he's not living up to our expectations. And we're hurt by the fact that our expectations aren't met, so let's hurt him in reply. So the crowd is demanding his death. Then you have the religious and kind of political officials, right? And they took him to the place called the Skull and they nailed him to the cross. I mean, it's so strange that religion became so contorted. It looked God in the face and said, how do we kill it? But that's sometimes the human condition as well. And then it says those who passed by, man, they were wagging their heads and they were saying, there it is, save yourself. Come down from that cross if you can. Right? When you put all those pieces together, you see his friends ditched him, the crowds turned on him, the religious system totally missed him, and then everybody else is standing back and saying, oh, there's another example where God doesn't show up. I mean, it's a terrible scene. It's like everything's just tumbling down a mountain. And yet I look at all of those layers with all of those people representing all these different corners of life, and I go, again, human condition. This is that thing that displays our brokenness and sometimes our ugliness when things don't go as we want or as we thought or what we should expect or what we would demand or whatever else. And so, again, it's hurtful, it's hateful, it's broken. And it's in the center of that then you see Jesus. And as the world is against him, he's for the world. I mean, that's what really blows my mind, right? It's like, if this is me, right? If I'm God and Matt's personality type and the world is set against me, I am not like, oh, what can I do for the world? I'm like, oh, dude, I got lightning bolts. Like that would be my response, but that's not Jesus's response. Instead, what's it say? Here's Jesus on the cross, and he literally asks, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he does this while they're actually like playing craps at his feet over his clothes. They're rolling dice just to split up his last remaining tangible things. So he sees the crowds, he sees his friends in the distance, the cowards that didn't even want to stick around. He sees all this stuff, and then he says, forgive. I mean, that is a powerful thing. When we're celebrating something like this holiday, you're celebrating a powerful thing that somebody models what true forgiveness is. And it goes a step further, because not only does he say, Father, forgive them, but we say a little while later, he actually cries out to God and he says, God, why have you forsaken me? And this is a strange line. We're like, yeah, why would God forsake him? But you got to couple it to the previous thing. If Jesus has said, God, forgive them, and God's like, yeah, but look how awful they're being, what Jesus is saying is, then I'll take their awful, punish me in their stead, so that you might forgive them. So he's not just saying, God, forgive, but he's saying, God, whatever it takes, even if I must sort of be estranged from you for this little window of time, I must suffer in this bold and brutal way so that they can be forgiven, give it to me. And so he has this moment of he's estranged from God in the punishment process. But he's doing that because of his heart to see forgiveness. So at the end of this particular part of the story, it says, Jesus shouted, he says, Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. And with those words, he breathed his last. And so then our friend Luke, a physician, turned Christian, turned historian, writing about Jesus, says they took the body off the cross, he's dead, put him in a tomb, sealed it up, and that was late on Friday. And so with that, you see kind of a contrast so far, right? You see humanity in all of its layers displaying some form of hurt or hate, and then you see Jesus displaying forgiveness and love, right? It's like you see the dark, and then with that, then his light is all the brighter, right? Because there's a contrast. It's no different than the artwork we have. If it was just all white, you wouldn't see all of the nuance, but it's against the darkness that you see the beauty of his light. And so all that contrast is coming out in the story, and there's Jesus taking their scorn as he takes their sins, finally gives up his spirit, so really as to give his life fully to and for us. And so the story ends on what we call Good Friday, but Good Friday was a pretty ugly Friday. And in most stories, Friday would be the last chapter. For most of us, right? If it was our last day and we died, we're dead. That's it. Story ends right there. There's no additional chapter most of the time. Yet what I like about Luke, my friend here, is he's writing this historical account. He gets through chapter 23 and he's like, and then they buried him and it was Friday and that was it. But then as he goes into chapter 24, he pivots. And he pivots with one single word, but. Luke's got a big old butt, just like the kind I like right here, all right? So I'm telling you, this is so good. This is so good, because it's like as a writer, he knows how to build the tension, you know what I mean? Bad, bleak, broken, death, but. This is but, oh man, early on Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared, but they found that the stone that was sealing the tomb had been rolled away, right? And so they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. And as they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. And the women were terrified, and they bowed their faces to the ground. And that's when the men asked, they said, what are you looking for? Right? Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? Jesus, you're looking for him, but he isn't here. He's risen from the dead. Remember, he told you back in Galilee that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified. The world would be set against him, but that on the third day he would rise again. So the women hearing this ran quickly to the tomb, or quickly from the tomb rather, because they were frightened, but they were also, it says, filled with great joy. Again, the story begins to turn now, right? And as they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message, they were going along, and then they met Jesus. And he greeted them, and they ran to him, and they grasped his feet, and they worshiped him. And then Jesus said to them this phrase that's so critical: don't be afraid. See, in one sense, it's in the moment, like don't freak out, it's really me. But in another sense, that becomes kind of the marching order going forward. You're terrified, but you have great joy too. And now that I'm here and among you, I'm doing something for you and to you and through you so that you don't have to be afraid. This is why as a church, we say, hey, life is better with Jesus. Not always easier or simpler, but it's better. It's better even in the hardest stuff. It's better to have Jesus with you than not. And so there's this sense of fearlessness that comes with what Jesus does. Because he's infusing life into the mess. He's transfusing his love and mercy and justness into the scenario. So he says, hey, don't be afraid. Now, for us as Christians, when we read this story, you have to understand, we don't see it as a fable. We don't see it as an allegory. We don't see the scene where they see Jesus as, it was the essence of Jesus living on inside of them. It's not, that kind of thing. We look at this story and we go, he was a dude who was God, who died, was buried, and 3 days later actually physically came back to life, proving that he has the power to impart life to all who believe in him. Like, that's exactly what we as Christians believe. Now, I'm sure there's some, certainly with us today, again, guests that maybe have come and go, man, I don't know, bro, a dude dying and rising from the dead, I'm kind of skeptical of that. And what I would say is I understand. I mean, I really do. I've had my own issues with skepticism in my life related to faith and things like that, so I absolutely get it. But maybe what I would say for those who may be a little bit more skeptical and uncertain of this story is I go, you know what? I get it. It's tough to swallow. But in a certain sort of way, we should all actually want this story to be true. Even if you don't think it is, there should be a part of us that goes, but I would want that to be true. And I think there's two reasons we should want it to be true. The first is pretty simple, which is if a dude died and rose again and he promised that everybody who believes in him is also going to rise, we should be like, wow, so there's life beyond life. I want that to be true. I want it to be true that I would see my loved ones. I want it to be true that there would be a world different than this world that isn't riddled with the dysfunction and self-hurting and brokenness and just division that we face. I would want a world that would be fresh and new and different and without flaw. Like I go, man, those are reasons that we should want to believe the story. I mean, I know for me, not only do I believe the story, but probably part of the reason I believe the story is because I want the story to be true. Especially as I look at what I see in the character of Jesus in the context of the story. It reminds me that everything matters because everything is eternal. And so all the more I'm like, okay, if everything's eternal and everything matters, then everybody matters in my life. And I want to bring the same tools to bear in their lives that Jesus brought into the story. Things like love and forgiveness and kindness, life-giving, saying don't be afraid. Like these are amazing tools that Jesus brings. So that's the first reason I go, I would want to believe the story. The second, though, and this second point leads to our ultimate issue of the morning of why. Why would I want the story to be true? And I go, well, because at the core of the story is a word that we all desperately need. It is the word grace. At the core of the Christian identity and faith is that word. And can I tell you what makes me sad is that sometimes we as Christians aren't known for that. I mean, it's like really sad to me that again, that is the headline, it's the banner, it's the big idea, it's the brand of the Christian faith. God shows grace. It's the unique thing about us over all other world religions. You're not earning, you're not having to become more enlightened, you're not having to do X, Y, and Z. It's God just says, I loved you enough to come into the world, to give myself for you, to give you grace. And then sometimes we sound like, well, now you better make sure you're behaving all these ways. And we lose grace. We forget grace. We tend to kind of just let it kind of slip out of our mind that Jesus came to really give grace, to advance it, to show it, to model it, to impart it, to infuse it into life. It's the ingredient that the human recipe needed, and that's what he provides. And can I tell you something? I've been pondering grace a lot lately. And it struck me. I told my wife this week, I said, it's so weird. If you think about grace, it has only one context. Really, it only has one. It exists for one reason. And that is, it exists in a context where there's imperfection. See, grace is only useful for the broken. Grace is only useful for the needy. Grace is only useful for people that are flawed and incomplete. You don't show grace to a perfect person. We're not perfect, right? Whether one's a Christian or not a Christian, we're all flawed. We're imperfect people. And that is why grace is so necessary and critical, because it steps in and says, yeah, you're right. You can't pull it off. You can't do it. You don't have it all solved. But I will show you grace nonetheless. That is the beauty of grace. In fact, there's a writer. We don't know who he was or she. We're just not sure who the writer was. But they wrote a letter. It's toward the tail end of the New Testament. We call it the book of Hebrews, right? But it's anonymous. But in this little letter, you see the why Jesus came to do what he did, and it starts in chapter 2. It says, since God's children are made of flesh and blood, it's logical that the Savior, and this is from the Message, by the way, so it's a paraphrase, but I think it's so good. He says, it's logical that the Savior took on flesh and blood in order to rescue them by his death. By embracing death, taking it into himself, he destroyed the devil's hold on death and freed all who cowered through life, scared to death of death. So here's this merciful, kind, compassionate, grace-filled thing where he says, yes, you're broken. I will take the brokenness. Yes, you failed. I will take your failure. You're flawed. I will take your flaw. I will identify with you. I will be like you and among you so that I can do this for you. It's such an awesome picture. From this, he says, it's obvious, of course, they didn't do this, go all this trouble for the angels. It was for people like us, broken, flawed people like us. That's why he had to enter into every detail of human life. Then, when he came before God as our high priest, as a mediator for us, right? He did this to get rid of people's sins. When he did this, he could do it because he'd already experienced all the same kind of challenge we do. He didn't sin, but he experienced the same pain and the same testing, and so he would be able to help when help is needed. See, I think sometimes we picture God as stern, aloof, detached, disinterested, right? We get these broken pictures of God. What you have here is God like leaning in. He's like leaning into us. Like, no, man, I want to associate with you. I want to be with you. I want to go through the same challenges you do so that when you come to me, I go, I get you. I get it. This is why you can come to me. I know the pain of life. See, to me, this is why I think Jesus is so compelling. I don't know of any other system whose God says, yes, I came to experience the difficulty so as to then impart to you grace and love. From this, the same writer in chapter 4 paints this picture, this why Jesus came to do what he did. It says, so then, since we have a high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, right? For he faced all the same testings as we do, yet he did not sin. Therefore, here's what it says. Here's the why, right? He says, so let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Not our demanding God, our fearful God, our mongering God, our gracious God. He says, just come to that throne with boldness, man. Storm through the door, be like, I am here to be with God because you are gracious God. So when we do this, he says, we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it the most. See, here's the thing about Jesus. He didn't come to start a religion where we all had to figure out how to measure up. Rather, he says, you know what? You got to give up trying to measure up. That's why I came to give you grace. The why is grace. The why is access. The why is acceptance. The why is being made new. This is what he came to do. He came to do it for you. He came to do it for me. This is our brand. This is the word that we should be known by. This is the word that should roll off our lips. This is the word that others should look at us and go, oh, wow, that's what grace is. We should embody this grace because that's what he came to do. He came to redeem the broken parts of our lives. He came to bring light to the darkness that was kind of lurking in our hearts, to face our bondage and to set us free. And frankly, you know what grace says? It says, you know what? It's all right. It's all right that you and I, that we're not all right. He made this statement in the Gospel of Matthew. It's, again, from the Message. It's a paraphrase, but I think it's worded so well. I think it captures the essence of what we're seeking to communicate today. He says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? And I say yes. He says, then come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I love this because you know what? That is why we say life is better with Jesus, right? He says, I want to take the burden. I want you to walk with me, do it with me. Be changed and renewed by me through this thing called grace. And if there's anything about grace that I know, it's that it's messy. In fact, as a church, next Sunday, we're going to begin a whole new series called Messy Grace. Because I find in Christianity, in religious circles, like I said earlier, we tend to forget grace. We start to almost become kind of like people who return to law, and we want to all focus on the law, and yet Jesus is like, I didn't come to do law, I came to do grace. Grace came through Jesus, it says in John. And so we're going to look at messy grace because, frankly, life is messy, and it needs grace. This is why Jesus invites us to come and learn the unforced rhythms of this wonderful, life-changing thing, this why, the why of grace. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you for grace. I mean, I really do. Like, I'm so incomplete. I mean, I'm waking up early this morning praying, seeing just my flaws still. I'm just flawed. I'm broken. I'm sinful. I'm hurting. I'm insecure. I get frustrated. And those are on the good days where I'm probably really doing well. So all the more, there are no perfect people here. We know it. We are all dependent on your grace. I pray as your followers, we would exude that, we would live by it, that we would share that with others, that we would remind each other that it's grace. And Jesus, I pray for anybody here that just, they're going, maybe I need that grace, that they would reach out, that they would say, God, save me by your grace, change me by your grace. Like, just between you and them, that they would go like, I want something different. I want to work through what messy grace is, because it's messy, but it is amazing too. And so, Jesus, we thank you and praise you for amazing, messy grace. Amen.